Weekly Pistol Podcast. At the end of this hour, we want you better than when we started.
All right, what's good? You guys ready to talk emotion? You were singing right now. What were you singing?
Well, I'm not going to do it now. Are you crazy?
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yeah. Oh, like to talk about
To
that?
talk
No.
about your emotions,
I'm ready
Veronica.
to be here, just not,
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Manny?
You know, that's that stupid fucking shrink thing. How does that make you feel?
How does
Yeah.
that make you feel?
I'll tell you how it makes me. I want to strangle a motherfucker. Is that good thought, Lauren?
Let's
Today I'm murdering somebody.
Emote, Manny.
Is that
Don't hold
okay?
it in.
I used to tell my doctor that. It was weird. I used to tell my doctor when I first saw her that I had visions or desires to murder the people that affected me when I was going through my process. She never committed me. And I was like, if I said I wanted to hurt myself, I'm sure you'd have me committed.
What'd
But if
she
I
say?
tell you I'm going to murder this person, it's okay. She's like, it's not okay. It's what I can't remember how she said it. It was like, do you have the means or
Something
Oh.
we would do.
I just told my psychiatrist about the assault at the dump, and he was like, which hospital do you want to be checked into? And I was like,
See?
shut the fuck
I'll
up.
kill you next when I get
Yeah.
out.
You shut up.
So before we get started, Veronica, you had a task.
Oh, yes.
Do you have the
have
numbers
it.
for Blue Health?
I do. We are at 99.
Oh, man.
We're gonna clear 100.
Oh, yeah. Easy. Before the
Not
end of the
good.
month.
So I thought we'd bring Lauren back. She's busy. One of probably the most popular guests on our podcast.
It's because of her blue hair.
It is the blue hair.
Yeah.
It's me. I've been clicking on it over and over. that's the 1,000 watches.
Who's this pretty girl that's on the podcast with the blue hair?
Every time a new client comes in, I'm like, watch this.
You're like, this is how cool I am right here.
And your homework is to watch it 3 times.
Yeah. We're still not getting paid from that. So we got to monetize. We got to get her on a shirt or something.
Oh, I get her out of
Yeah.
shirt.
We should put her in the shirt you wore in that one podcast. I don't think she saw it.
Which shirt is this?
The one we were trying to get for views at like half
Oh,
boobies
my
were.
boob. Oh, you
Yeah.
gotta watch that
no, I
podcast.
You got to
Yes,
watch
I've
that
seen it.
It's not
podcast.
my real boobs, FYI. Just
In case
saying.
you were wondering.
So, Lauren, I appreciate you coming out. I know you're busy. You've got 2 granddaughters now, right? 2?
Grandbabies. Yep.
Grandbabies.
Third one coming in January.
3.
Wow. Girl again?
The other girl.
Wow.
Fun.
Yeah.
That is, I don't know if that's karma or. Holy shit. What does Aaron think?
Little Aaron?
No, big Aaron.
Oh, big Aaron? I
Yeah.
don't know. What does he think?
That's a lot of money. I
That's a
know
lot
where
of
his money
girls.
goes.
That's a lot of
All
girls.
I see is a.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
I'll tell you what, God bless those boys as they grow up because whoo, all he's got to do is walk 'em by the 3 safes that he has full of.
Oh, yeah.
That's why we're out of ammo is because of Aaron.
Aaron's
We
hoarded
can't find it all.
Nope. He's the reason.
Yeah. So I do appreciate you coming out. And part of the reason is I got some calls and they were like, bring Lauren back. She's articulate. She's funny. And I was like, yeah, but you have to see her off mic because you're kind of constrained when you're here. You still got to remain somewhat professional. So we will be unprofessional for you.
Oh, I was gonna say, who has to remain professional? Because I know it ain't this group.
We'll just make sure she
hold
keeps
it
her
together.
license. Let's just keep that. She's not a treating doctor, physician. She's just here as a guest. Personal opinion.
Oh,
Well, that's what the lawyers would say.
Ah.
Make sure you put that under there. She's not treating you. So real quick, we'll just jump right on it. One of the things that all of us in this room, excluding Aaron, because I don't know him that well with emotions. None of us here have emotions. Let's be honest. Right? Bartender, you have emotion? Look at his face. He's just stone faced. No emotion. None whatsoever. Could be the whiskey that he's drinking, though.
That's dampened it.
Yeah. So, Lauren, I had a call, and we'll just jump right into when I got first diagnosed with PTSD. I had a lot of anger, and I really don't know who I was angry at. I don't know if I was angry with myself because I felt like I'd let myself down. I let my squad down. I don't know if I was angry at the department.
I was angry at everybody, but I think I was angry at me, which pointed at everybody else.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my wife and my family took the brunt of that anger. And at the time, they were the biggest targets, I guess.
I think
You know.
that's,
Plus, they were always
that's probably pretty common, though,
Right
that
there.
we take it
Yeah.
out on those at
The
home.
people that are closest to you, yeah,
Right.
you're going to go with whoever's safest. But you're also spending most of your time with them when you're not at work. And at work, there's a certain. Well, we're going to talk about this, right? Parts. When you're at work, you're not the husband. You're the cop. So
Right.
there's a different persona. I can't be who I am in front of all my clients. God forbid, I'd lose my license. But
You'd lose your license,
Yeah.
but you'd be a fucking billionaire because everybody'd go
we'd
see
have
you.
fun.
Yeah. There'd be no PTSD in the world.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons, right? We're more ourselves when we're with the people that we're closest to than we are at work or in other situations. But we'll talk about that in a bit.
Yeah.
well, yeah, Mr. Magician, you ain't going out on patrol and showing. Hey, you want to see a card trick?
I did that all the
Before
time.
or after I put the handcuffs on you?
I did it all the time. It was a
Whatever.
Jedi mind trick. I used mind tricks to get people in handcuffs. I didn't have to fight them. Trick them. Look, Dennis knows. He knows how you trick people. Hey, look, it's not the crime of the century. You just got a warrant. Never mind, you beat the shit out of your wife. We're not worried about it. It's just a warrant. You'll be in there overnight. It's not a big deal. And then you just jump fucking page 2 them for extra charges, right? See? So recently, I'll include myself in this, but recently, let's see, I'm 7, 8 years out. The anger's dissipated, pretty much all dissipated, the anger. And now is the emotions that come. So, you know, I think in groups, I don't think I've said it on a podcast, but the first time I actually felt emotion that I was not prepared for was actually a stupid fucking commercial that was aired. And you guys may or may not remember. It is about 2 or 3 years ago where a divorced father with a son marries a divorced wife with a daughter. And the kids are probably right around 7 or 8 years old. And I'm minding my own business, watching TV, and the commercial pops up. And at the end of the commercial, the little girl says to the little boy, "Your dad just married my mom."
Oh God, are you gonna cry right now?
And I was like, "Oh, let me fuck.
Okay.
Fucking tears. What the fuck is going on?" I don't know where that came from. I don't know why it came out that way. And so, meanwhile, like Anna's looking at me like, "What the fuck's wrong with you?" And I was like, "That was so fucking good, Richie." What the fuck? I'm like, what just happened? So that was the very first time that I experienced that. I don't understand it. I still don't understand why these emotions come flooding back. But before we get to that, before I was a police officer, I wouldn't say I wear my heart on my sleeve, but I definitely I was more of the emotional type, I guess, you know, loving, caring Uncle Theo. And at some point it got shut off, and I really don't know when.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of tell us like
process?
why does our brain do that shit?
Yeah, I want to know.
Here comes COVID brain. I don't know.
That's everybody's excuse now.
Yeah, right. I don't remember. So I'm gonna back up to why I work with first responders. I did 18 months with crisis response with the city of Phoenix and Chandler, and the normal human response to some of the sketchy AF places that end up having to where you go right is to nope. And I remember very distinctly most of the places we went. I'm like, I'm not getting out of the van, but you have to, right? So I would force myself to go in. And this was over and over and over again. I'm not going in there. I don't want to touch that. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to sit and listen to this person screaming. Everything in my body was crawling out of my skin going, I don't want to be here. And that was where I got kind of interested in going, how is it that these people, because these were safe places. I say this all the time to my clients. I went into a place that had already been secured, right? There was nothing in there that could probably hurt me. But the people who went before me had to clear the place, had to make sure that it was safe and okay. And I became very interested in how do these first responders show up, go places that are sketchy AF, and not have all their skin crawling and nope the fuck out of there.
Were you a
That's what
firefighter before? Is that why you staged and waited for it to be code 4? Is that what you were doing?
we held back with the
You were waiting with fire?
firefighters. So
AF, by the way, is as fuck, people.
Yeah.
Because she won't say it.
I
but-
didn't want to lose my license. So that's where I began studying the nervous system of first responders, started to get a really big appreciation for the people who do go places where everybody else is running out. and just develop the love for the population. And what ends up happening is the people who make the cut and can stay on the job are able to kind of dampen the system. So we've got 3 brains that we've talked about in the previous podcast, right? We have a brain stem, we have a feeling brain, we have a thinking brain. That's the last thing to develop. And the neocortex wraps over the limbic system, which is your feeling brain, or the more primitive brain. This brain, the newer brain, doesn't finish developing until early 20s for most people. And the brain works from the bottom up, so it sends signals upwards. And this part of the brain interprets from here. Does that make sense? We can't talk to the limbic system. If I throw something at you, this shuts off pretty much, and this reacts. And that's how you're able to duck faster than you can think, or dodge, or grab a ball if I throw it at you. So this is always sending information to us. Emotions are nothing but information, which is what we talked about a couple weeks ago. And they inform us how to proceed in the world, what to do. When I leave my office and it's dark at night, I want to feel some fear and anxiety. And if I don't listen to that and I try to shove it down, I'm not going to be safe and pay attention, right? But those emotions don't really serve a first responder, because if you listen to them or you let yourself feel that anxiety or fear, you're not going to do the job. And some people don't make the cut, right? I've got some very young officers who are going, I don't know if this is what I'm cut out for, because they've had that moment of facing that fear, because they haven't learned to really kind of prune those signals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To be able to, it's kind of like yanking the telephone cord and going, it's still calling, but I'm not receiving. Right. So
that brings up an interesting point, not to cut you off. So in the last podcast we did, we had Robert on, and he had made mention that he wouldn't, if he could do it again, he wouldn't become a police officer before 25.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I got to say, I kind of agree.
Yeah.
The brain isn't fully developed. And I know that right now we're short, and they're taking what they can get. But I do have some very, very, very young people coming in. And I look at them, they're younger than my children, and I think, God, your brain's not even done yet. You're a baby, and you're wiring it to this. It's a toxic job, and I tell all of my clients that. It's toxic on the brain, it's toxic on the body, and you're taking someone whose neocortex isn't even fully developed yet, and you're exposing them to what is most certainly going to create a PTSD system later in life, just based on how the nervous system responds, right?
But are they overriding something? Are they teaching us to over? Because I don't remember them.
We learn it on our own, right? It's not something that's taught. It's something that you learn to do. So there comes a point where you show up on a scene and you've got to shove that down. And you all, if you think back on it, could probably remember those first few years where you're like, nope, this is exciting. I'm going to go in there and do that. That's the only emotion I'm listening to. So we're interpreting emotion as it comes up. And that's a big piece of what's happening also. If I don't interpret my fear and my anxiety when I leave my office at night, I'm going to either overly react to it or I'm going to ignore it. And then I'm not going to be safe, if that makes sense. So one of the things that happens is you guys interpret that as exciting and fun, and this is why we're doing the job. And then after a while, a couple of things happen. The nervous system becomes exhausted. The brain starts to prune wiring it isn't using very well, and you develop a defense mechanism. I'm not just going to listen to that emotion. There's no emotion there, because emotion appears to not be helpful in your job. Once it opens up and you start feeling it, and I try to teach officers, like I've said on past podcasts, to use their emotion as information.
I think it's dangerous. Emotion is danger.
Emotion can be dangerous because it's a matter of how you respond to it, right? If I go out to my car and I'm panicked because of the fear and I don't know how to use it to be alert, I'm going to react to my reactions. And the more I react to my reactions, the more they're going to amplify. And then I'm going to go into panic attack, right? And I've had officers who are now experiencing panic attacks, and I'm trying to teach them, number one, to calm their nervous systems down and use skills to work through the panic. Number two, listen to the emotion and use it so it doesn't amplify into a panic attack. If you show up on a scene and you feel something and you go, okay, I know what this is. It's anxiety. Pay attention. You want that. I don't know how to say this delicately. I was on, just imagine you're at a scene and the house is dark and there are no curtains and there's a massive bay window and you know that the guy inside is armed, right? Where do you want to stand?
Not in front of the window.
Thank you. Okay. There is an example that I give a lot of my officers where someone did stand in front of the window, and I'm like, that's someone who isn't listening to that gut saying this is not a good idea. right? Or they're overriding it and going, I'm just going to be a cowboy and stand right here and not worry about it. Or I'm going to be, I want to be cool and act like it's not cool as in I'm cool, but as in I don't want to make you think that I'm afraid, so I'm just going to approach like I'm your friend. But they're not listening to that signal. The signal tells you don't do it. And when I did a ride along not too long ago, my signals were going, I don't want to be anywhere near that window. I'm not even getting out of the car. Because A, not my job, B, I want to live, and I'm not wearing a vest. So my signals are telling me this is not safe, and I use that information. If I don't use that information, I panic, right? Or I ignore it and I get hurt. So teaching people to listen to the signal, part of trauma work is befriending our sensations. And what that means is we get a signal and we don't respond to it so it doesn't amplify. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's where your panic attacks happen. That's part of it. Part of it is also that your alarms are sounding all the time because of the job. But so using emotion as information. And if you do that, it doesn't get bigger. And it informs you about what to do next. So some of my officers, who all have my cell phone number, will occasionally text me on shift. I had one text at 10:30 at night going, the anxiety is really bad. And I said, what is it trying to tell you? Well, the guy works in South Phoenix, right? It's telling me I work
Get the fuck out of Dodge.
That's all you need to know.
right? And after we did a little bit of chatting back and forth, he's like, I'm good. It didn't amplify. He goes, the anxiety is appropriate. It's telling me to pay attention. I'm not in a great part of town.
Okay.
So using it as information, and that's kind of what you and I talked about. Every emotion is just information. We feel guilt because guilt tells us we did something taboo. And when we use guilt appropriately, we come in remorsefully, we try to get back into tribe. Self-pity is one of the most valuable emotions I try to teach my clients because we're taught not to wallow. And self-pity isn't a verb, it's a noun, right? It's an emotion. Self-pity says, I'm valuable. I'm not going to let you do this to me again. I'm worth something, right? So we can use that as information rather than trying to push it away or amplifying it and turn it into a behavior. It's one of the most powerful emotions. And when we embrace emotion as information, then we're able to use it to tell us what to do next.
But how does that equate to a officer that's been on a year that can't? Because I didn't have that. Like well, maybe now that you said that, I thought it was excitement. I wanted to go through the door.
That's how you're interpreting it, right?
Right.
And part of it is excitement because this is a calling. Not everybody wants to be a cop. And for most of these people, the calling is I want to be excited. It's an exciting job, and I want to help people, right? There's not a single officer I've worked with who doesn't tell me I would take a bullet for somebody, which is why I love this population. It is a calling, and that calling creates excitement. I'm excited about my job. I love what I do. I don't think most people would want to do what I do, but I love it. It excites me. So there is an element of excitement. There's also an element of interpreting that fear as excitement, I think. And in the first couple of years, you're not listening to it. You're just getting in there with that adrenaline rush. And adrenaline makes us feel like God, right? We can do anything because adrenaline's made to make you lift a car or run across a field or do whatever you need to do. The cocktail that comes with fight or flight is massive. It's thousands of chemicals, and it gives us that superhuman strength feeling, right? That's what you guys are running off of, which is also what exhausts the system after 5 to 7 years and turns into exhaustion syndrome, which is very, that's where you end up with adrenal fatigue and low testosterone and stomach issues. And one of the reasons why the statistic is death before 60 for a lot of you guys, it's how that system gets overloaded from that constant dump of chemicals. But that aside, if I take an officer who's under 5 to 7 years on the job and they've had a critical incident, they didn't feel the fear, but when we kind of freeze frame it and take the scenario a step by step, there is always a moment where they're like, oh my God, I was terrified and I was frozen. And if you guys think back on your critical incidences, you'll identify that moment, right? But you didn't feel it in the moment because it wasn't helpful and you were too busy using the adrenaline to get what you needed to done. If you freeze, you get hurt. Right, and there are officers who get hurt.
Well, half the time, Tanya and Zach had a cigar, and we were talking about a call that we went on, and Zach's like, I had my gun out before I realized I had my gun out. But on going back to what you were saying, Veronica, how old were you when you got on the department?
26.
How old were you?
32, I think.
I was 24. Bartender? 25. So we're all at that highest, past that, right? Right around that time for your brain. And I'm still fucked up.
I was just gonna say we're all good.
We're fine.
Fine.
I got into law enforcement when I was 19. I mean, I was in the jails. But I don't remember. I'm more scared now of the dark than I was ever in my entire life.
For sure.
I don't like to drive at night. Like if it gets too dark, like I'm like, fuck, I'm almost 50. Maybe I'll just blame age.
Part of it is age. As we get older, we get a little more. I have a client who's not a cop, and she and I were just talking about that the other day. She's my age, and we're like, I drive like an old lady now. If someone comes near the car, I'm like, get the fuck away. Part of that is age and experience, but part of it is also once that dam breaks open, and this is the moment that most of my clients have had when they've been on for 10, 15, 20 years. I was watching a commercial, and suddenly my face was wet. What the fuck is that, right? I'm crying.
So what? I think the roof's leaking myself. It can't be me.
It's just I'm sweating. We call that your cup is full, right? I think that's the expression that most of you guys use. But what it really is the nervous system has taken such a beating from the job. If you imagine yourself walking around with an IV bag and it's just pushing the fight or flight chemicals through your body constantly, we're not meant to live that way. Humans are created to have a fight or flight moment, act on it, and then move on. There's a really good book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it talks about our nervous system. Animals don't develop PTSD because they either get eaten or killed, or they are effective, they run away. Right? But they expend all of the energy that comes with fight or flight. If you think about how your jobs happen, you're not expending that energy. Every now and then you're in a chase or you're using the energy. Most of the time you're sitting, you're writing up paperwork, you're talking to someone with all that fight or flight going through your body. And again, picture that IV bag and just pushing those chemicals for 12 hours at a time through your body. And that wasn't meant to happen to anybody. The same thing happens with developmental trauma when you take a child who's raised in an environment that's unsafe. Their brains look different. You were talking about memory earlier today. We know that people with PTSD have smaller hippocampus.
She called me a hippo
Right?
earlier.
And
Big
their
words.
limbic systems, where the alarm center is more active and it's overdeveloped, right? So their memories aren't very good. But so you take developmental trauma, same thing with a first responder. They're being exposed to this rush of chemicals all day long when you're only meant to experience it once in a blue moon, and you're not flushing it out of your body. Recently, they've discovered that most of the cancers that are linked with firefighters and police officers are due to a lack of sleep, good deep sleep, because that's the only time we restore our cells, and that constant flood of chemicals through the body. So when the body prepares to fight, our muscles are filled with chemicals that prepare us, right? But when do you guys ever use that on the job? I mean, how often do you really use that fight or flight response? Not most of the time. Then you go home and you're in a vegetative state because you've dipped way below fight or flight and you didn't go back to baseline, which is rest and digest. And you're in this vegetative state and you're watching TV and you maybe drink to go to sleep and you haven't flushed any of that stuff out of your system. It's just sitting in there. So you've got your adrenals are not working the way they're supposed to, your adrenal system. Your muscles are filled with all of these chemicals that they're not expelling. You guys don't stretch before you go to bed. I try to tell them to do that. I don't even stretch before I go to bed, right?
I'll pull a muscle. It's
Right.
not even worth the pain.
So none of that is getting flushed out. And the second thing that happens is the organs are starting to get bombarded with all of this as well. That's why you have sudden death, right? What is sudden death? You just drop dead. Most of my clients go, I was just at HeartFit, and they said everything looks fine, but it isn't fine. It's not.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah. And
Yeah, everything was fine, and then I went down.
And then you got people who they retire and they're told everything looks good. You don't have high blood pressure. You don't have all these other things. And they drop dead, a year or two after retirement for no particular reason.
Yeah.
And that's because of this exhaustion syndrome, what happens when you just have that constant fight or flight going through you. So that's the toothache is what I call it. You were talking about being angry all the time. If you have a toothache, if anyone here's ever had a bad toothache, breathing hurts. Right? Air isn't supposed
Thinking
to hurt
hurt.
your teeth. Everything
Yeah.
hurts. Right? And it'll make you scream. You drink water and you're like, picture your whole nervous system like that. Kids laughing, someone talking, someone asking you a question, bright lights. Right? That's all going to affect your nervous system, and you're going to have a response that looks like anger.
It was all anger.
And it feels like anger, but it's really just a fight or flight response. So it's about interpreting sensation, right? When I drive home and I've had a particularly rough day and I maybe feel like running over pedestrians, which I would never do,
Everybody feels that way. It's not a PTSD thing.
doesn't
People need to be
everybody?
run over.
doesn't everybody?
Yeah.
I have to remind myself, I have two choices in that moment. I can say, okay, this is just a big toothache. You had a rough day. Or I can say, what the fuck is wrong with me? And I'm going to respond to that.
Did you ever think it was their fault?
Always.
Because it's their fault?
Bitch.
Yeah.
I have places
Come
to
on.
be.
Fucking light's green.
Yeah,
What are we
let's
waiting
go,
for
let's
here,
go.
people?
If we don't know what that is, we're going to react to it. And if I react to it, I'm going to have a thought about it. And that thought is going to lead to an emotional state. And that emotional state is going to lead to more. And it spirals. Does that make sense? So then
Yeah.
I go home and I'm in a bad mood. Lauren's in a bad mood because she thinks she's all fucked up. Instead of just going, this is a toothache, you had a rough day.
Well, how do you do with a rough day?
By telling yourself it's a rough day, this signal that I'm getting is just telling me that I had a rough day.
I have
That's
rough
all it's
hours,
telling me.
Lauren. Rough hours. I don't have rough days.
Minute by minute. Yeah.
Yeah. We're not
Okay.
talking about days here.
So then if you're talking about people needing to flush it out at the end of the day, officers or first responders, other than stretching, what the fuck are we supposed to do?
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff you can actually do.
Drink.
Yoga is
No.
Heavily. Oh, that's wrong answer?
Yeah.
Wrong answer.
You're always wrong.
First thought, always wrong. If you look up polyvagal theory, there's a bunch of exercises you can do to get your nervous system back in order, at least to some extent. Because the difficulty with this particular population is that I'm sending you out to get re-exposed again and again and again. So you're really just kind of playing catch up with the nervous system. But besides stretching, there's types of breath you can do. You want to stimulate your vagus nerve. So you can send a signal to your brain saying the threat is over. Right? We have three parts of the nervous system: rest and digest, freeze and collapse, fight or flight. And we want to stay in rest and digest as much as we can, but exhaustion syndrome is when you don't get back to that. You're just in fight or flight, freeze and collapse. And you're dipping above and below those two levels you want to be in. There are things, touch, right? I ask all of my first responders to bring a spouse in. And this has bitten me in the ass more than once, but I'm like, sex is a great way.
What? Say that again, please.
That's what all of them say, and their spouses are like,
Let me
fuck
record
you.
that. That's going to be a sample.
It is it's a great way to de-stress. But if even that, just touching, having someone put a hand on you, good touch, not bad touch, right? We want Lauren touching people that she
bad touch.
doesn't know.
I want the bad touch.
No stranger touch. Having your spouse put a hand on you, sit next to you, things that will bring your nervous system back up into
Okay, so before we
rest
go
and
further,
digest.
now that was brought up to my spouse, and
not received well.
well, she said it's very hard to touch someone who's angry,
Yeah, I hear that a
Right?
lot. I hear that a lot, which is
because she thinks it's her.
they all think it's them.
Right.
We personalize, right? And I think it's important for spouses to understand that we all function on what we call cognitive distortions or distorted thought processes. If my spouse comes home in a bad mood, I'm automatically thinking it's something I did.
Right.
And if they cannot personalize their spouse's behavior, they can get some distance from it and a little bit of compassion. And that's when I send home cognitive distortions with them. I try to explain the nervous system to them so that they can get some distance from that personalization and understand if I have a toothache and you pour water down my mouth, ice water, it's not you. I'm going to scream, right?
Right.
So understanding that it has very little to do with the spouse unless they're an asshole, and that it's all about their nervous system. How do you bring them back into rest and digest? The times, and this is the paradox of it that's kind of sad, is I have a lot of spouses that go, I don't feel like touching him or her because she's been an asshole
Yeah.
for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But could you understand how someone has to break that cycle, and if you could be more compassionate towards their nervous system and understand, then you're going to get that back. It's a feedback loop.
I'd like a note for extra sex before we leave. D.
Don't
Let
hear that.
me ask the bartender
I'm gonna
when
get a text
someone
from
is
Anna.
upset. Do you want to touch her?
Put your
no,
peen away.
because
Put
she's
your
gonna
peen
fucking
away.
she's gonna
Well-
be like chasing you with a fucking mallet or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
I didn't
go
mean to
ahead.
interrupt you. I want to talk the opposite, and I'll dime myself out for this. Okay. My doctor was saying the exact same thing when I went through my incident. So I see this first doctor, and she says, sex, touch, all this. So the first time after my incident that me and Gloria went to have any kind of touch or
Intimacy.
I started bawling. And then I associated sex with emotions like that, and I wanted nothing to do with sex.
think that,
Don't you cry after good sex though? No, you don't. Doesn't everybody? Is that weird?
Yes.
That's weird.
What was the movie where he was crying in the shower? That's all I see with that motherfucker. The crying game? Oh, no.
I think those are moments when an intervention with the couple would be a good idea, right? Because there's so many more factors involved, and that was the other thing that we were going to talk about today was parts of self. I have never met a first responder that developed some symptoms of PTSD and came to my office that didn't have something in their past that connected to an event that happened at work, right? We all have, and that's what drives most of them to go into this line of work. Bullying, trauma, abuse, assault. They become not social warrior justice. I hate social warrior justice or whatever that stupid phrase is, but they become warriors for the people who can't protect themselves. Right. That's the calling of most of my first responders that come in. And so that oftentimes links up to something else, right? And you want to get to the root of what that is. But it could also be that the emotion just feels so big that, and you're not used to feeling, you're used to dampening your emotions or not receiving that signal, that it feels overwhelming, which is what happened to the officer that called you that you're going to talk about, right? The minute you start receiving those signals again and you've spent so much time and energy not getting those signals so that you could do your job, it can feel overwhelming.
Well, and I can talk about, we talk about me being a crier, and I always think that that's punishment for me because we couldn't cry as children because we were told that we were stupid.
Yeah, that was a family.
That was a family thing. I get it. So, but once I associated, this is going to make me emotional and make me cry, then I get that it goes back to that, but that's hard. Like thinking that emotions are bad and I have to stay away from them.
Well, let's ask
because the way I was
Veronica.
raised. Well,
Do you?
I guarantee
We know
she's
her
my
background.
twinner.
Well, no,
Yeah.
because we have the background, right? What was your upbringing? Was you don't show emotion,
Right.
Right.
So then you compound that with
We don't. I shouldn't say like we showed plenty of great and happy emotion. It just was anything sad or hurtful. Like we just.
Yeah.
So how does
Move
that
on.
play in now for you?
I still do it.
You shut down? She just shut down? What's wrong, baby? Nothing. Leave me alone. We're good. Fine. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Those are, we call them unspoken rules. Every family has those. And if you think about the brain as a supercomputer, it's loaded with the programming system. And that operating system becomes how we go through life. And those are the rules that we live by, right? They're very hard to unlearn. You can notice them and work around them, but they're your automatic thought, right? That's what I was talking about earlier, cognitive distortions. Automatic thoughts are the things that we learn about the world and ourselves that aren't necessarily true, but they become kind of shotgun. And whatever operating system you're loaded with at the time you grew up and started to learn things about the world and yourself is the operating system that you operate off of. So again, you can notice it, say to yourself, I know what this is. This was the rule I was taught growing up, and I can override that. Right? My Mac can run Microsoft, but you have to load it in there.
Right.
Right? And it's not going to be first nature to it. I've got to click on it and bypass whatever bullshit it's giving me and make it do what I want it to do. And our brain is the same way. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors that come into this. And you were breaking a family rule, right? You're not allowed to cry.
Yeah.
So that gets associated with sex, and now suddenly that's something I want nothing to do with, which is kind of separate from. There are lots of other exercises on that note, though. It's not just stretching and sex, and that's all there is to life.
Damn.
There are,
Shit.
Well, and you don't have to list them. Whatever you said, those.
some of the most powerful are breath, right? I say this all the time. I used to think that, right, breathing, take deep breaths and
Yeah.
stuff. But
Tactical breathing.
Yeah, I went to a training with two neuroscientists who showed a bunch of brain slides, and after 30 to 60 days of doing certain types of breath, there was less activity in the limbic system where the alarm center is, right, the fight or flight response. And the hippocampus actually looked like it can get bigger, so your memory gets better. So I left that training being a real firm believer in certain types of breath, one of them being a foghorn, which I've taught most
Isn't
of my
that
people, right?
the stuff the monks use, right?
Gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
If it's chewing gum, Gregorian chanting,
Yeah.
right? Because that humming
Yeah.
vibrates the nerve that sends a signal to your brain. Acupuncture. There are two spots in the ear that the Doth piercing hits that can instantly stimulate the vagus nerve and create a
Yeah, I
calming
did
sensation.
that. That was one of the things I did. Was the best thing I ever did was I told the acupuncture person. I'm like, yeah, I have struggle with PTSD. She's like, we're going to put it in your foot and your ear. And I'm like, that makes no sense. And she hit in my ear. It was like a pressure valve had
Instant
released.
release.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was absolutely. And then the reason I said the monks was because of tactical breathing. Special forces use it. SWAT guys use it.
Yeah.
But it's hard to breathe. Sometimes it's hard to breathe.
I hold my breath.
Yeah, so do I.
I hold
Most
my
people
breath
with
a lot.
PTSD do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to remind my clients to breathe.
Yeah.
We walk around all day long, shallow breathing, and our brains take 20% of the oxygen is used by our brain. It's a very inefficient organ. And if you're not deep breathing all day long, you're not thinking clearly, your brain isn't getting what it needs, you're not getting enough blood flow. The minute you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, you've hijacked your brainstem, which wants to breathe for you. And when you start breathing intentionally, you're now shifting the chemistry of your body, if that makes sense.
That's why I
even
smoke
just-
cigars.
Yeah, taking that's what does it.
That's what helps.
I
Totally
think it
helps.
does help.
It does help.
It does help me.
It does. It
Yeah.
teaches me to breathe in,
Take
breathe
a
out.
deep breath, hold
Yeah.
it in. Yep.
Good for you. It's good for you.
Cryotherapy. I have there's a company who sent me a pamphlet that said they were giving free cryotherapy, or I don't know where they got their funding for first responders and veterans. And cryotherapy is something that's getting a lot of attention recently. If you take can't do this in Phoenix in the summer, but if you take a hot shower and then the last 30 seconds turn it to cold, which is actually scalding in Phoenix in the summer, that can do a lot for your nervous system as well. Right? You're
Cold
trying-
showers help.
Cold showers, yeah. Taking
Every
an ice
morning, cold
bath.
shower, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so there's a lot of different interventions if you look at polyvagal theory that will help you. But this is what I tell all my clients also. I'm like, if I go to the gym and I pound it out for 3 hours, I'm going to be fat and flabby tomorrow, right? I feel like I should have lost weight. I go home and look in the mirror. I'm like, God damn, it's still fat.
Yeah.
So if you
Doesn't go
don't-
anywhere.
if I want to get good muscle tone, I have to go every single day, which I don't. If you want good vagal tone, if you want your nervous system to be put back together, these are a commitment of every day. And I'll have them come back. They say, I did the breaths and it didn't do anything. Well, it's not a rescue, right? It's not an inhaler. You need to do this every day. Just like if Lauren only does it once, she's still fat and flabby. It's an everyday commitment.
Oh.
Oh, no.
I have issues with commitment, Lauren.
I'm soft.
I have
for my
issues with commitment.
grandbabies.
Commitment
It's
issues.
a commitment phobe. So that answers the nervous system question. There are other pieces to this that we're going to talk about as well, like parts of self. But
Yeah.
any questions on emotion so far?
I don't know. I want to know Veronica's emotional state.
Like
Are,
right now.
are you so when you get triggered, do you just shut it off? Like
Yes.
it just shuts off. And there's no way to
I think it's really hard. I don't know. I just don't. I put it away and I try not to deal with it. I suck at it, right? I'm really bad.
That's why I think.
Never, never agree.
He's all
It's the truth, though.
he's all fuck yeah, that's exactly what she does. Yeah. So how do we
The
address
correct responses.
Yeah. She's all, you better fucking answer that
It's the
correctly.
truth. I'm really bad at it. And he's really good. He's really good at communicating. So he can help me through it, but it takes thank God he's persistent because he doesn't quit. I take forever to finally say what's actually wrong or if
Why?
Do you know what's
Why?
actually wrong right away or not?
That's a good question.
I want to know why.
Because I would say I don't know what's wrong.
I don't know what's
and
wrong.
it takes me a long time to try and figure it out myself. But during that time, I don't want you fucking in my face like, oh my God, what's wrong? Is it something I
Yeah.
did? Can I do anything for you? You can fuck off and give me some time to figure it out because I need quiet time.
Right. That goes against what Lauren said though. You did touch. You know what I mean?
Well, but then I get called
It's
needy.
grounding.
You're so needy. I'm like, God, I just want, can we just,
See, but this
I
is
just want to hold their hands.
with my roomie. It's good touch. So,
Good touch.
but if Gloria wasn't asking, you have to. When we're in a fight or flight state, we're not in a thinking brain because thinking brain is dangerous. It's about 500 times slower than your feeling state or your limbic system. If I throw something at you again, you're going to instantly block or catch it. Hopefully, I've hit a few people in the forehead because they freeze.
Tanya.
Yeah, they freeze. But that's a survival function, right? Everything we do is about survival. The brain is entirely about survival. That's its only goal. Everything is about safety. And so if you're in a fight or flight state, your thinking brain is interrupted and someone's now in your face asking you questions and they're actually creating more fight or flight. Right? And
yeah,
then
that's
we
what it feels
freeze
like.
and you're going, I can't answer what you
Too
just
many
said.
questions.
Right, because I'm not in a thinking brain. If a man's drowning, you cannot come up on them. They will pull you under.
Right.
Right? I'm trying to rescue you. There's no thought process, right? They're in survival mode. You
So
gotta come
what
up
does
behind
the
'em.
spouse do for that? Hold, just reach over
Quietly.
Yeah.
quietly.
Quietly.
Don't ask questions, D.
Yeah.
No
Don't-
questions.
It's like
Hold the
whole,
space.
What do you want for dinner?
Oh God,
Motherfucker?
no! You
Yeah,
can't
just-
ask me that
yeah,
question.
No.
Don't
I
ask
tell
me.
spouses not to. And
Yeah.
when you come in the door, don't ask how was your day. That will short circuit the brain of
Yeah.
someone who's been on more than 7 years. It's I'm glad you're home,
Yeah,
right? And then later, is there anything you want to talk about? Because they are in a vegetative state. They're not in a thinking state. And you're going to short circuit that brain and put them back into another fight or flight state. And then what do you get? Irritability, anger, snapping.
The shit you don't want to.
yeah. Because what do you want for dinner? Food,
well,
food.
I think that's the biggest difference is the I have a spouse that gets it. Like if you have a spouse that can't accept those parts of it and they just want to keep doing it because of whatever their issues are,
Yeah.
they just have to keep fighting. I don't know how some people can do it because I had a compassionate, so kind, just trying to take care of me
Yeah.
when I needed it.
There you go, D. Quietly, just put your hand on hers, and it'll be better. It'll be better. Yeah.
Does it? You know what? When he puts a hand on you, that feeling you get, right? It's a rush of oxytocin and a bunch of other chemicals that make you feel good. They calm you.
I
Does it?
definitely have noticed. So like in some of my some of the nights where I've I guess been flipping out or something, right? Like there's been a couple times where he's kind of just stopped me and like put his hands on my face and just like, and it like I don't make something stop in my head where I'm just like I start to realize that I'm freaking out and I don't really know why or whatever, but it like just stops something.
It stops the spiral, right? It's we're about connection. There's and this is there's a psychiatrist named Vander Kolk. He wrote The Body Keeps the Score, which is a book that
That's a good book.
everybody should read.
Yeah.
I've heard him lecture multiple times, and every time he does, he starts his lectures with a slide from 9/11, and it's people running on a bridge, and they're all on their cell phones. And he says the most important thing you need to realize about this slide is people are not running away from something; they're running to. Everybody in 9/11 who had someone to run to, everybody who had someone on the phone with them who felt supported and cushioned, didn't develop the set of symptoms that the people who lost someone or couldn't get a hold of them did. And if you think about feeling effective and held and having, because we're tribal creatures, having that support, that's what cushions you against PTSD. There was a trifecta of shit show in Tempe a couple months ago where everyone on the same shift was exposed to some horrific events. And I got a slew of those officers in my office. The ones who healed almost immediately were the ones who went home and got to cry or had a spouse who said, "I'm so sorry," and held them.
Yeah, I don't know how to cry.
The
know
ones
how
who
to
were
cry.
able to accept that, right, or were able to
Right.
open up or just sit there with a spouse holding them. And I'd ask them, what happened when you got home that night? The ones that had more disconnected spouses or spouses that work night shifts or they're single or they're divorced or there's tension in the marriage are the ones who had to come back again and again and again. We're wired for connection, and connection makes us feel safe. And when he takes you by the head and stops that spiral, that's a connective moment, right? It puts you into your rest and digest moment of, I'm okay.
You got a good man,
safe.
Veronica.
I know.
You got a good
I
man.
know.
Yeah.
That was good.
That
and
was
very-
deep.
That was very
That was
informative.
deep.
Thank you.
That was worth the $200 we're paying her to be here.
She wishes.
All I got was this dumb shit.
Yeah. All I got was this stupid shirt. Okay, so we'll talk about the call that I gave you a few weeks ago. We had an officer that called, and he was struggling with an internal he was doing, right? The officer should not be an officer, did everything wrong. But the officer that was sitting across from him,
The IA.
the IA lieutenant, was struggling, right? Because the lieutenant that was sitting across from him knew that what he did was wrong. And there was a victim out there. So he was fighting for the victim. But as he was sitting across from this officer, he was actually feeling sorry for the officer, right?
Ooh, that's a tough place to be.
Which, when I got the call, I'm like, I know someone with blue hair who will help. Let me make a call. So the call went something like this. Lauren, the person is struggling. He doesn't understand why he should feel sorry for this officer across the way who fucked up, right? But was struggling tremendously. And the lieutenant was like, I felt bad for this because you were just going to ruin his career. He lied during the investigation and was going to get fired, was going to lose his certification, was a younger officer, mid-20s, something the officer hadn't experienced in the past. Right? Because how many times do you sit across from a criminal and just think you're fucking going to prison?
Yeah,
You're fucking shitbag.
You're a shitbag.
Right. You don't associate them as the cream of the crop of society, right? So you struggle with that. That was something the lieutenant had never seen before, right, in his career. And for me, I tried to put myself in that lieutenant's place, and I thought to myself, how are you supposed to do your job when you feel bad for the suspect? Right. So I reached out to Lauren, and what was the response?
There were a couple factors in that scenario. I had mentioned earlier some of the things that create the trauma response that sticks, as far as like not the nervous system, but a file that isn't processed in the brain, right? We go to sleep, we put away information that we need into remote memory, or we dump it. That's what dreaming does, and that's what deep sleep does for us. So with a lot of you guys, there's no time to dump, and you don't get deep sleep, and so you have all these files stacked up in your brain like cookies in the computer that haven't been cleaned out. And fucking COVID brain.
Use your words.
I got nothing.
We just lost her.
Edit that out. Yeah,
We
it's
just lost her.
like mist.
We'd help you, but we don't know.
So
We're just
what
as
do you?
helpless.
Yeah. Well, Tanya definitely doesn't remember.
What was I saying a second ago?
So what?
No,
When
put me back on track of what I just said.
when that lieutenant realizes he's feeling sorry for the suspect, right? You had mentioned.
Trauma. Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. All these files that get packed in the brain, right, that don't get processed or put away, they're not in remote memory. If you scan the brain responds as though it's happening again right now. For a lot of the first responders, there's an element in some of those unprocessed memories that feels familiar. And with this officer, there were several components, and one of them was this. The officer that was being investigated was a similar age to his son.
Yeah.
Right, so there's a familiarity factor there. I can't tell you how many officers or firefighters I've sat with that said it was the same age as my kid, the same age as my niece. I saw my kid on the floor, right, and that was when I snapped, and the dam just broke open. Right?
But that was a victim. This person's a suspect. That's what
There's still
That's what struggled with the officer when.
Well, but they're still an officer, right?
Yeah,
So
you're looking at this person and you're thinking to yourself, he's an officer.
They're the good guy.
They're the
but
good
they're
guy,
the bad guy
but
right
they
now.
fucked up, and you're not only going to get him fired, he's going to lose his cert, but there's a victim that he did wrong.
right, but you're not thinking of that in the moment. You're looking at the human part of that person sitting
Right.
across from you, and you are relating to somebody who's similar of age, and thinking, I wouldn't want to fuck up my kid's career
Right.
or his kid's career. or
But can
that
you
kid's
imagine
career.
being a detective or an investigator and having that much empathy for a suspect?
You guys are able to usually put that aside, right? But it does happen. It happens quite a bit. And I think most of the time, this is where parts comes into what we talked about, me and that officer. Everybody has a bunch of people living in their heads, and cops do not like to hear this, but everybody has a bunch of people living in their heads. The person who's sitting here with you isn't the person who goes home with her husband or interacts with her kids. I am not therapeutic I'm a raging bitch with my kids half the time. And I specialize in adolescence. There's nothing therapeutic about me. I am trained in marriage and family therapy. There is nothing therapeutic about my interactions with my husband, because when I go home, I'm not the therapist, I'm the wife. And
Aaron
when I'm
flinched.
yeah.
He flinched. He's like, I don't want to talk about it.
You're not getting the therapist. She takes her hat off and leaves it at work most of the time. If the therapist comes out, what I get is, don't therapize me. So we keep our parts very separate. And the person who sits with her friends isn't the wife or the therapist, right? It's somebody different. So all of these people that live in our heads that are parts of self have different roles. And what happened in that example that you gave was there's a father in the head, there's a detective in the head, right? There's also a son, there's also a husband, there's a friend, there's a human being, right? There's all these parts of self. What I find with officers, just in particular, is that the cop part is bigger than all the other parts for the most part. It takes over the persona. And I think that's a survival skill, which is a good one, because you can't shut off cop, right? It's not useful to shut it off, turn it on, shut it off, turn it on. It's such a big part of staying safe that it does become a very big part of the personality. And so even when you retire, still a cop, right? So with this example of the person who called me, I said, what did it feel like, right? Well, I was thinking of my son. And what happened was the parts kind of collided. And when that happens, it can feel like a sort of an identity crisis. What the fuck just happened? I'm trying to be a hard ass here, and I'm thinking of my son. And this doesn't feel good.
Well, because the officer did wrong, right? And it's hard to look at the person and know that what they did was so wrong and egregious that they need not be that, they need not hold the shield. Because then now they just fuck this person's life up.
But that's the officer speaking, right? The father was also present, and that's where this identity crisis sort of happens. And I've had a few officers that have, again, there's an element, right, at each call, and that's what usually freaks them out if they've been on for a while. Or if they're younger and they're still trying to put identity together, right? Because you create identity. We create persona, don't we? We learn to become that person on the job that we aren't at home. And that takes practice. And so if that's still in a formative stage and those two parts collide, I get a lot of people in my office going, I can't do this, right? All I could think about was my kid or my wife or this other thing, and I can't have that interfering. I'm going to get somebody hurt. So
I think that would happen a lot with the sex detectives.
Sex crime, kitty crimes?
Kitty
Yeah.
crimes detectives, yeah.
That's a
As
whole
far as-
different
yeah,
world. I mean,
it's-
you just, when I thought about that officer, I thought, my son wouldn't do that. That was the easiest way to shut it off. My son wouldn't do that.
yeah, you had to talk to the detective,
Right.
And that's what you and I talked about on the phone before I did the podcast, is how do you work with parts of self? They have to talk to each other. You have to talk to the parts. I kind of brain farted me for a second there. I had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful client who did many years in ICAC, and that's just a whole other world of stuff.
That's the basement of hell.
Yeah.
Oh,
Lauren.
yeah. I wouldn't want any part of
Yeah,
that.
I don't want no
Yeah.
part of that.
Nope.
I think there's a special place in heaven for people who help kids in that part of the job. But there's often an element of childhood trauma there too, and keeping those pieces separate is very difficult, right? They become warriors again for children, and they burn themselves out for it. And there's almost always a story behind that. One of I think the most profound and beautiful moments I ever had was an officer several years into therapy who said, "Oh my God, it was me I was trying to save all that time."
Wow.
How'd you not break down?
I did.
Oh, okay. That's the right
I think
response.
we both cried. An amazing, amazing human being. So within our system, and this depends on which theory you subscribe to. I've done a lot of trainings with Dick Schwartz, who does internal family systems, which is parts of self. And he doesn't really subscribe to polyvagal or nervous system or any of that other stuff. And then if you talk to the nervous system people, they're like, yeah, parts of self, whatever. But I think that they're all a big piece of doing therapy. In our system, we have an organization of manager parts. If you've ever laid in bed and you're like, I don't want to get up, and then a part of your brain goes, get your ass on up, that's a manager, right? We have manager parts, we have protector parts. Those are the parts that go, you're not going to access that emotion. Like you said earlier, right? I don't know what happens. It just, I can't. And that's a part of the psyche going, it's like a troll on the bridge going, you're not going to go past this.
Right.
No access, right? Because it's too big and you can't handle it. And so protector parts are all about making sure the system stays okay. We have firefighter parts, which is super fun to tell a cop.
Oh, right.
And firefighter parts, y'all have worked with firefighters. They have one job. That's
Stage.
it. Right?
That's their job. Stage.
I thought it was workout.
Starting the stage.
Work it out.
They stage and cook.
They put out fires. They take care of the crisis at hand, right? And they don't care about the mess that they leave behind. They will knock down walls. They will leave their garbage all over the floor.
And they get rewarded for that
Yes,
shit.
they do. They get
Yeah.
a medal, right? But and that's their job. They don't care what it takes or how much destruction happens to get the job done, because their job is to make it safe in the moment, right? So our firefighter parts do the same thing. Their role is to put out whatever fire of psychological discomfort we're going through. And firefighter parts drink and cut and use drugs and have addictions and cheat and do all these other things because they're trying to create equilibrium in the system. They're also suicidal. So I have a lot of officers who have suicidal thoughts. I have suicidal thoughts, and I'm very open with them about it. It's a part. And these parts are often very young, and they don't have any other way to put out the fire. There's a part I share it with all of my clients every day, practically on the way home, because I carry. It's like, hey, you should pull over and shoot your head off, right? Because you don't want to get out of the car and check the fucking mail.
Yeah.
They all know about me in the mail. And this part just thinks it has a really great idea, right? This will put out the fire. You won't have to feel any of those emotions anymore. When you learn to work with these parts, they're not as big or scary or whatever. And that was kind of what I talked about with this officer. It doesn't have to be a crisis moment if you understand that these are just different people living in your head, and they all have ideas. And the father stepped out and went, oh my God, this is someone's career I'm about to ruin. It's someone's son, right?
Yeah.
And then the officer's going, fuck, somebody ruined somebody's
Fuck him.
right?
Yeah.
He
That's what the
created-
officer thought.
He made
Fuck
a
'em.
victim, right?
Yeah.
So that person had two parts arguing with each other. And if you're aware of what's going on, then you can sit back and observe this and not have quite such an argument. They actually balance each other out at the end of the day. You have one part that's saying, have a little bit of justice and mercy. You have another part that's going, you need to apply the law, right? And when you can put those two together, then you can do a better job. You're not that fucking hard-ass detective who's like, you're a piece of shit and you should die.
It was better to be a hard-ass detective.
It's easier to be a hard-ass
Yeah.
detective.
Way easier.
It's easier because it doesn't create all of that psychological discomfort.
Yeah.
But
It
so,
was way easier. So one of the things that I can talk about real quick before we wrap up is something that I was struggling with that I can tell I asked Lauren about. So during that time frame when I had to call for the officer or whatever, I was struggling with some of the depression and thawing out and stuff like that. And I called Lauren and I was like, these emotions, fuck them all. Fuck them all. She's like, no, you need them. You know, Lauren.
You know,
See how I
Lauren.
can hug it. It'll be okay. I was like, nah, fuck emotion. And so what I was dealing with during this time frame when I was depressed was like I had this fear of dying. After I collapsed, after I went down, I thought death's coming, like, and it's gonna happen quick. So I was like completely, like I thought I'm dying. So
Are you talking about recently?
just recently,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
The same time that I called about this officer, I was talking to her. I said, Lauren, you fuck emotions, right? Because I'm trying to figure out in my mind, probably like Veronica, like, why did I get angry? Why did I get sad? Why am I in panic mode? Everything is a threat when you're in fight or flight. And for me, when I was in this depressive state, everything was about death. Didn't matter what I did. If I went to the store, I was going to die. Somebody's going to shoot me. My head was on a swivel, right? Just
Yeah.
recently. And so the funny story is, and maybe it's too much information, but I'll say it anyways. So I was like, my wife tells me one day, she's like, maybe it's time you consider getting snipped. Right? And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, just, it takes like 5-10 minutes. And I immediately went into panic mode. Like, I'm dying on the fucking table. My legs on the stirrups. They're going to cut the cord and I'm going to bleed out and die. That's the kind of emotion.
That's a lot of descriptive information. Thank you.
But when you think about it, for me, I was like, how did I get from a minor procedure to death? Right? That was that was my brain.
But a couple things were going on there that you and I talked about. If you've already got an overactive, what they call a dominant, you're dominant in fight or flight, right? You've got all of our brains have a security system. It's scanning, and it's constant because again, everything is about survival. Everything is about survival. That's our primary function: survive and reproduce. And so, if the brain is constantly scanning, we're picking up billions of bits of information right now that we're going to filter out later on in the day. That'll probably show up in dreams, right? But that aside, it's when it thinks it has a threat, the brain will sound an alarm, just like a smoke detector. And our smoke detector doesn't care if it's a cigarette or a bonfire or a stove fire. It's the same alarm, same alarm, same alarm. I tell my guys, you ask someone a question when they walk in the door, same alarm. So if you're dominant in that state, you've got this alarm that's going off all the time, and you became either dominant again or you've been dominant. So think of your smoke detector sounding falsely all the time. Everything is going to exacerbate that. And your brain, because it's wired to look at survival, is going, oh, that looks dangerous, that looks dangerous, that looks really dangerous, because these alarms are telling you everything's on fire. Where we feel crazy, or where a lot of my clients feel crazy, is you got thinking brain going, there's nothing going on here. I'm sitting at a dinner table with my family. but I feel like everything's on fire. Because you have to realize, even if you're not in fight or flight, if you're in freeze and collapse, there is a tremendous amount of energy stored in freeze and collapse. When we've dipped down below, right? Freeze and collapse allows us to either not feel our death. That's why people forget things when they're in car accidents or whatever. They block out that period of time. And it floods you with all of these opioids so that you don't feel yourself getting eaten or mauled or whatever. But the other thing it does is it allows you to reserve your energy so that if you have the opportunity to escape or fight, you can. If you watch a documentary on predators, there's one that gets shown a lot in trauma trainings where there's a cheetah that grabs a four-legged creature on who knows what on a prairie, and it goes limp, right? It gets it by the neck, and you think it's dead. Its eyes roll back, and it goes totally limp, and it's dragging this four-legged creature, and then it gets surrounded by hyenas, and it drops the prey, and the prey gets up and springs. That was a freeze and collapse moment. So when you think you're in that vegetative state, you're also in a state that's a tremendous amount of energy. It feels really, really uncomfortable. It's not a relaxed state. It's I don't want to open the mail or make a decision or get up off the couch, but I feel so wound up.
Yeah.
So whichever one you were in, it's a wound up state. And then your brain is wired to look for survival. So it's doing what it was wired to do. It's just going overboard. And again, the biggest piece of trauma work is befriending our sensations and understanding what the signals are about. So if I go to the grocery store and all of my alarms are going off and I think to myself, my nervous system is doing what it was designed to do. I'm paying attention. I'm not going to amplify those signals. I'm going to actually relax into it, and they're going to quiet down. If I don't, and I'm like, oh my fucking whatever, right? It's going to get bigger, bigger, bigger. And when I have clients who finally learn this and do it, they come back and they go, I went to a restaurant and I was okay. I had a moment of panic. I said, I know what this is. My nervous system is doing what it was designed to do. Thank you, nervous system. All of it calms down, right? Snip, snip, you could bleed to death. It's unlikely.
That's probably not something you want to say to me right now.
Something we want to tell this fool.
But here's
I was the hyena. I fainted.
here's where
Then I took off running.
Anna's really going to come after me now. Here's where you want to use that information, right? If you pay attention, you're not going to use aspirin. You're going to take it seriously and not drink a lot the night before. You're going to follow the directions of the doctor
I'm gonna
because
drink
you're
heavily.
terrified.
I'm going to drink heavily.
Oh, jeez.
When we
There's a
don't-
funeral going on. The boys are dying at that time, man.
I'm gonna give him a send off.
Yeah.
So you use that fear as information to do everything you can to make sure the surgery goes well. You use the information when you go to Costco to say, I'm going to pay attention because it's crowded and there's motherfuckers in the world, right? You use it when you go to the restaurants because you guys have a history of running into people that you arrested. That's not comfortable, right? So there is a part of you that does need to be a little bit vigilant and pay attention, and you thank it. Right, you get there and you go, thank you for sending me this panic signal. Thank the cop that's still inside of you for still being active. You're paying attention. I appreciate you. Be on your merry way.
Yeah, I'm gonna die.
Your penis alarm.
I'm gonna die. Yeah. So I texted a buddy of mine who had just recently got his done, and I told him, I said, look, I'm gonna confide in you in some shit because we tell people in Pistol, right? You panic, reach out, get a couple of opinions along the way, and I do that. And it's worked. I asked one person, they're like, yeah, it's stupid. Don't worry about it. But this one, I call my buddy and I said, hey, let me tell you, I'm terrified I'm going to die on the fucking gurney. Like as soon as they cut me, I'm bleeding out and dying. So the next morning I wake up to like a text from him, like 6 texts. He's like, hey, here's some statistics. No one's ever died from that. Do you think you're special? I'm like, I'm totally dying if they cut the cord.
Special.
Yeah.
He's going to cut the wrong cord.
Oh, Jesus.
He's not speaking to the thinking brain, though, right? Those texts are going to your feeling brain that's going,
Yeah.
I am going to die.
I'm the hyena. I'm going to pass out and die.
Right? But
Manny asked me, and I said, I don't know anything about
Yeah.
balls.
I
So
got none.
Yeah.
I got none.
I can't help you out.
Terrifying.
Manny, use the
Terrifying.
terror as information. And
It tells me not to do it, Lauren.
Well, what it's really telling you, though, is pay attention to all of the factors that could lead to you being
Follow
the
the
first
rules,
person that bleeds out.
bitch. Follow the rules.
Absolutely.
But I
Your
think-
doctor's going to tell you no aspirin, no drinking,
Yeah.
all of these things that you need to do the day before the surgery. And you're either
Terrible.
going to fuck off or you're going to do what he says.
Yeah.
Right? And if you have enough panic, you're going to pay attention and go, I don't want to die. I don't want to be the first motherfucker to die. So I'm going to
There's
do
my picture all.
everything the doctor says I should. That's how you use that information.
Well, here's the fucked up part. I argue with my brain, right? So I call somebody logical who's not fucked up. He's a cop. And I said, look, I'm going to die.
Wait. But let me. You called someone who's not fucked up and he's a cop?
Yeah, we work for like some small fucking department.
He's not technically diagnosed.
He's
or
not
anything.
diagnosed.
Yeah.
But then I
You
did
know.
call some people that aren't cops that did get snipped, and they're like, dude, it takes like 15 minutes,
Yeah.
bag of peas, and you go about your business, right? But I argue with myself because I know that this is something that happens on the regular all day long, every day, all day. But for some reason, my PTSD brain and my regular brain are fighting, right? The people in my brain, right? They're saying, it's the devil and angel theory. The devil's saying, dude, you're going to fucking bleed out right then and there. They're going to cut the wrong fucking cord and you're dead, right? Or they're going to cut and the shit's just dead altogether. You know what I mean? And that shit panicked me.
Yeah.
So my right, the correct brain is going, dude, you're a fucking idiot, right? You're an idiot. Don't think this way. And that's a struggle. You know what I
The
mean?
doctor has one of these. If it gets, hold it like the wall.
I'm like, how many times can they cut that motherfucker?
Another perspective to look at that is these two parts actually work together. If you listen to the part that goes, this happens every day and it's totally fine, you're going to do the wrong thing beforehand because they're going to tell you don't drink alcohol, don't use aspirin, don't do anything that will increase bleeding or bruising, right?
Yeah.
And the one brain that's going, it's fine, everybody does this, is going to do whatever it wants, right? That brain doesn't give a shit because it thinks you're Superman. The other brain is so terrified you're going to die. And if you put those two together, you get a balance. What you get is a brain going, this could be serious if you're not very careful. And a brain that's going, it happens every day and I'm going to be fine. And if the two work together, this one goes, go and do it, it's going to be okay. And this one goes, but take all of the precautions. Don't fuck off the night before. You got to put them together. That's what they're meant to do. That's what they're meant to do. Parts are meant to work together to create equilibrium in the system.
Let's just say they're in discussion.
It's in the discussion
They're in
phase.
discussion phase.
Yeah.
It's negotiable.
They are negotiating. Let them negotiate.
I'm trying to negotiate it. I'm like, well, I'm going to die. I seriously think I'm going to die on that table.
Then you better take
It's a very
all the
real feeling.
precautions that the
I'm
doctor
sure it
tells you
is.
to.
Yeah. I just keep thinking to myself, like, come on, really? Like, it's just.
Manny, use that fear to do the right thing the night before and to put the bag of peas on after.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
dummy.
Don't run a marathon after it gets done.
Dummy.
It just scares the shit out of me.
It tempers you.
Yeah.
Because there is a part of you that thinks you're Superman. Every cop thinks that they
Well,
are.
I always thought, right, and maybe with Veronica and Tanya and the bartender, I always thought if I went through a bullet,
Not
right?
a vasectomy.
Not a vasectomy. Right?
Dude, don't.
But that's exactly what happened. And here's why. This is what I explained to my wife. The night that I collapsed, I had no feeling, I was just gone. And I thought, this is a motherfucking way to go. Holding a box of donuts and you're dead. That's what we went for.
Best way to go.
Of all times, that's my wife's like, hey, I want some donuts. I'm like, let's go to Bosa, grab, Baker's dozen.
Good donuts, Tim.
And then fucking, he's dead. Doesn't die the cool way, right? Chasing a suspect, going
donuts,
after a
that's so
terrorist. You know what I
ironic.
mean? No,
Way to
fucking, next thing you know, my
represent,
wife's pounding on my chest. You're like, oh my God, I'm calling 911. You died.
That
And
would
I'm
be
like,
the headlines.
can you imagine? That's
Guys
my
with
life.
Donuts.
Yeah, that's my life, Lauren.
Wrong,
Yeah. You get the text, you're like, hey, we're sorry to tell you Manny passed away today. On a good note, he was holding a box of donuts.
Way
That's
to
not
be
even a cool-
stereotype.
Not even a cool way to go
jeez.
out. Like, he shot down 5 terrorists before the 6th one got him or some shit, They had to throw 3 grenades to blow him up before he died. No, motherfucker's holding a donut. Died.
We're
Fucking
how old are you?
47.
Okay. So
I'll be 48 in October.
there are stages of life that we all go through, and in each stage there's some predictable thought processes and responses. And one of the stages that this is the midlife crisis, more or less, stage that you're in, where you start to review your life, think about you're more than halfway through potentially, especially because you were a cop for so long. And so death becomes a very frightening thing for people around this stage of life. That's just part of what you're going through.
Well, you just mentioned we don't see 60, and you wanted me to get on the fucking table and cut cords? That's not helping.
I'm just going to put in a plug for Anna and what she'd like to have happen here.
Just
You don't want an oops when you're not going to
Well,
make it to 60.
It is something. I agree with you because I do look at these people and like some of the people that I grew up with are now dead,
Yeah.
right? And I'm looking around going, these rounds are coming down range, and I can only dodge them for so long.
Yeah, this
Right.
is the age where we start looking at Facebook and going, how did they die? Why didn't you write why they died?
Yeah.
Right? I need to know how.
Exactly.
Because we're reviewing and we're thinking about being a little bit more than halfway there and what have we done so far and what do we have left and how is it going to end for us? And people that we know are starting to get sick or get cancer or they've dropped dead and you're like, fucking, I'm that age too, right?
Yeah.
Take care of your nervous system and you'll go past
So let me
60.
ask you in closing, going back to the officer that called, for the officers that are out there that are interviewing these suspects and they start to feel for the suspect, how do they bridge that dilemma? How do they do the right thing and not feel sorry for the suspect who committed the crime?
I think it's okay to feel sorry for the suspect and still let the officer do what they need to do. Compassion isn't a bad thing. And if you talk to yourself and go, I understand this person's human and they're still a piece of shit, right? They need to go to jail. If you understand that that's also just information, my information is telling me that I'm actually a decent human being. And that's what I told this officer. That's telling you that you're actually a decent human being who cares.
Yeah, but I think that's
no, because we squash that. We lose compassion, I
Yeah.
think, over time in this job because you're
yeah.
dealing with
You
shit.
that's
get
the
very
emotional
cynical.
part.
Yeah.
That
You get, and I think that's what shocked this officer, right? You get cynical, and he's like, "Why am I feeling sorry for this guy?" Because you have a kid who's about the same age. Because now you're a little bit more sensitive to PTSD and people, and you're more thoughtful of feelings and just being a good person. Right? The cops aren't good people, but when you get that reality check, you say to yourself, I feel this way because I'm a good human being who cares about people. And because I care about people, this person needs to be brought to justice, right? You get that balance going in your head so it doesn't take you down. Because again, if you react to that emotion or that reaction, it's going to amplify. And then you're going to be you get in a noodle loop, right?
Yeah.
Now you're just around and around and around.
Yeah.
And you can't go forward. And you've got to be able to halt that by saying, this makes sense. I feel sorry for this person because he's a human being. He's somebody's son, but he made a very bad decision.
Yep.
And he still needs to be held accountable.
Yeah.
Right? And you can have both. You don't have to get stuck
That's why
in
I
that
drink,
spiral.
Veronica.
Me too.
That's why I drink.
Me too.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You're actually really good at this. You should think about
You
this
should
as
get a
your
job
career.
doing this.
Yeah.
Does it
Probably
pay in
pays
t-shirts?
well. It pays in shirts.
Thank
So
you
what
so
did
much for
what did we
having me.
learn today, Veronica? Make sure
drink
make sure that the bartender is sexually active.
Oh my gosh.
He holds your hand, right? Okay, so Lauren, you are the best. You're my hero.
Thank you.
And
Mine too.
on many occasions after the conversation, I did tear up talking to you because you did help. So as always, as your shirt says, to us
And tease.
and tease to us and those like us,
Boop.
Cheers.
Boop.
Aaron D, bartender, you guys, thank you for showing up. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.